Thanks everybody for coming out this snowy evening. I'm Ted Pollard, President of the Radnor Historical Society. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors, the Radnor Conservancy and the Radnor Memorial Library, for sharing this program with us. And I'd like to thank our program committee too. We put a lot of effort into designing our programs, getting speakers, and I'd like to thank Doug Brown and this committee for helping pull this all together. My first impression of open space came in about 1965 when I used to come out here to visit friends. And I had a fancy sports car. I drove on Darby Paley Road around where the Willows is right now, and I thought, this is heaven. It's just like an English countryside. Didn't mean anything to me except that I liked the beauty. But when I found out what open space was all about, I dove in head first. Now on to our distinguished panelists, in no particular order. Art Lewis. Lois and Art Lewis moved to Woodland Avenue in North Wayne in 1957, and since then Art has been involved in a number of things in Radnor, including commissioner, school board member, and many other civic endeavors. But tonight his purpose will be to discuss his recollections of the politics involved in open space acquisition in the 1960s, and particularly the 1967 bond issue. Bill Spingler, lifelong resident of Radnor, St. Catherine's and Villanova grad, 3 years as elected official, served in Delaware County Council, commissioner of the 3rd and 6th wards. He's now president of our Board of Commissioners. Bill is a real booster for everything Radnor, especially open space and trails. Bob Hurd, he and his wife Jeanne lived in Radnor Township for 50 years, from 1960 to 2010. He first got involved because his 7th Ward Commissioner, Herb Russell, was transferred in 1969, and Bob served the balance of his term and then one full term for a total of 7 years. His extensive real estate background came in handy in his terms as commissioner. Bob's professional life started in 1958 with the Albert M. Greenfield Company, selling and leasing commercial and industrial properties in the Philadelphia region. In 1971, he started the firm Zalesny and Hurd Realtors with offices in Center City. He retired from the business in 2000. It was in the city that he first met Norm Woljan, who had purchased the Danziger property, now known as the Willows. His firm had business with Woljan in the city, but not in Radnor Township. Noel Farley. Noel has lived in Wayne since 1971. His wife, Jeanne, died in 1989. They have 2 children, Claire and Connor, who live in Colorado. Noel has a PhD in economics from Yale and taught for many years at Remark College. Subsequently, he spent over 10 years on the Planning Commission, 2 years as chairman. His time was spent dealing with some of the major issues, such as the Sunwell property and the implementation of the concept of density modification in the planning for land development. He left the consulting firm of Booth, Allen & Hamilton in New York to begin a career in horticulture. Eventually, he became involved in the design and construction of horticultural greenhouses, solariums, and conservatories, which he's still doing as president of Glass Enclosures Unlimited, Inc. John Fischer. John and his wife Nancy moved to Radnor in 1979. John has a long history of involvement in open space, planning, and various aspects of preservation of nature. He's a member of the Park and Rec, was a member of the Park and Rec Board of Radnor Township for 10 years and chairman for the last 5. He's been a member of the Radnor Conservancy Board since its inception and president for the last 4 years. He's also a member of Radnor Township Open Space Committee and a member of the Jenkins Arboretum Board of Trustees. As you can see, this panel has many years of involvement in open space and related issues. They work to help preserve the natural beauty of Radnor for future generations and help make Radnor the lovely, desirable place to live that it is today. It was not easy, as they will soon explain. Now let's begin our program. I'll turn it over to Jeanne LaRouche, moderator. Thank you.
Being her husband, I'll start the applause.
It took me till I was 31 to get married, but you can see I waited for a really special guy.
He never came along, so she had to say.
I must say this audience is absolutely fantastic, marvelous, unbelievable. Who would come out in this weather? And so many of you. Who would come out in the storm, in the ice and the snow and brave these vicious temperatures to be here? Well, obviously, it's people who truly, truly are true believers. People who love open space and cherish it. Now, when I started to do the doodling around, writing up the little blurb for this meeting tonight, got a little carried away, perhaps, because I said, you know, these are pioneers, these people. Well, a little over the top, maybe. But, you know, I really look at all of these gentlemen, ladies, well, you noticed all gentlemen. I look at these gentlemen as truly pioneers. Pioneers, why? Because they were the people way back in late 1960s and early 70s. They were the people with the vision. They were the people who said, you know what? 1969, there's a lot of vacant property, a lot of open space. But I see in the future, it's going to be gobbled up. They saw that. They had the dedication. They said, I see this and I believe in this, and I'm going to work. I'll do my volunteer effort. I will be out there. I will be sending petitions. I will be beating the pavement. And remember, in those days, you didn't have the internet, so you had to get on the phone. A lot different. But most of all, and most importantly of all, they had a love, a great love of this green country town. They loved the birds. They loved the green. They loved the openness. They loved the trees. And for that, I certainly, all of those good reasons, I do call these people pioneers. As I say, they're not pioneers in the usual sense. They're not taking their wagons going across the wide, vast prairies of the United States. But they are indeed, to me, certainly pioneers. Now, as you look at this group here, we've got a lot of people with a lot of gray hair, or white hair, as the case may be. So we know that these people are, all of us here, we're well, there's some people with no hair at all, but, you know. We know that time is really important to this saving of this history, this preservation of history. It's important because it's crucial that we do it now before it's too late. This library has done a lot of oral history, and I know we have a lot of tapes preserved from the years back from 20, 30 years ago of people who are no longer around, and they tell of a different story that doesn't exist today in Radnor. But in any case, we have our pioneers here, people who have done so much. Now, this is billed tonight as an oral history. Now, we all know about written history, right? And we have, you know, 3 former commissioners in this group tonight, plus the current chairman, president of the Board of Commissioners, Bill. So we have a lot of people who know about written history, who can put structure and framework around anything that else is said. But mainly, it's not written history, it's not dates, it's not events, it's not people. It's oral history. Oral history is the spoken word, usually, hopefully, transcribed into tapes or something, and thank you, Studio 21, for being here. But transcribed and saved, and it tells the story of the little guy. And that's the part I love the most. It's what happens when just your neighbor and my neighbor get together, and the changes that come about because people got together, because they cared. And that is a large part of oral. We don't hear about Ronald Reagan in oral history. We hear about the stories of what happened around him, the the motivation, the feelings, the emotions. And that's what oral history is about. So we'll have a little blend of both. In my mind of way of thinking, the whole process of people getting together in groups and sharing an experience and making something happen is the very essence of our democracy. There's a scholar, French scholar, that I'm sure you've all heard of, Alexis de Tocqueville. And I paraphrase him when I say, you know, he was here in America around the 1830s. He was here and he was saying, what is this democracy stuff? What is it? You know, how does it work? Does it work? And so one of the things he said, these Americans, they see a problem, and all of a sudden, they form a group. They form a group to do something about it. And that's what we're going to hear about tonight. One of the things we'll hear about, those groups that got formed because they cared about open space. And they had the dedication and the wisdom to do something about it. Our first, oh, by the way, we will have time for questions at the end, and I'm sure there are people in the audience here tonight who, you know, were part of that open space movement, so perhaps you have a story to share, but I hope we do have time tonight. And our first speaker is the gentleman who I call Mr. Wayne. He's been a part of almost anything in Wayne for as long as I've lived here, and that is Art Lewis. Art?
Didn't have to be reminded to clap. Thank you. It's a privilege to be here, to be the first among this group of old men reliving the past. And does not include the young gal who just spoke, of course. My job, I think, is to kind of give you a picture of the beginning, if you will, my beginning and the beginning of things that I remember, the 1960s, and from the political perspective. And things were entirely different then. It's those of you who weren't there, I mean, you had to be there. But believe me, it was tremendously different. Radnor at that time was probably at least 6-to-1 Republican registration. Now, of course, it's just about even. All the local elections were settled in the primaries, okay? By the time you got to the general, Republicans all won. That was true locally, county, everything. The township commissioners and the Republican committee people, all 28 of them, were very tightly controlled by the Republican bosses at the time. It was a very solid organization, a monolith, okay? All the township jobs were patronage. Many of the employees were also committee people, Republican committee people. So it was all part of the action that kept going throughout the year. Delaware County, the infamous War Board, was also a solid monolith of control. There was one representative on that council, they called themselves, from each state legislative district. And they met and they controlled things. I'm not going to get into all the names, but this is all part of the history. And again, this was all patronage, all the county employees. And one interesting sidelight is that a county employee would get the paycheck on Friday, cash it, and stop in Republican headquarters and contribute 5%. Now just, okay? That's the way it was. Change was not invited. It was suppressed. And for instance, to speak at a commissioner's meeting or a school board meeting at that time, you had to get permission ahead of time to say what you were going to say and then get permission. Otherwise, you were not allowed to speak. That's the way it was. So anyhow, my wife and I moved to North Wayne, as Jeanne said, or I guess Ted said, in 1957. And I got involved with the North Wayne Protective Association. And that kind of led into getting involved. Jack Heister ran against the organization and was elected commissioner in 1963. And shortly after that, he talked to me and persuaded me to run for a Republican committeeman. Again, they were all solid, Republican, the old guard. So in 1964, I worked to visit everybody and beat Bill Beeson, who was a Republican leader in the township at the time, by 8 votes. And also 2 others, Bernie White and Bob Emlin, were also elected committee people. And that was kind of the beginning, if you will, of getting started, this insurgency, this forming a group to get something done. So anyhow, I started as a committee man. My first big election was November '64, promoting Barry Goldwater. And if you've ever read anything about that situation, that was tough, okay, as a Republican. Anyhow, but before that, all Republican committee people, they had to stop into the Republican headquarters and pick up materials for Election Day, as well as paychecks and whatever, or pay envelopes for all the workers. I was stopped in, and Al Swing and Rocco DeRusio, whom I'll talk about later, offered me a $25 check. I turned it down. I was afraid that was going to happen. If I'd have accepted that, I'd have been, they would have had the record for me. So anyhow, that was all part of the way they operated. So the major players were part of the regular Radnor Republican Committee, they called themselves. And Al Swing, who was township treasurer and party chairman, and actually in the county organization for a while, he was one major player. And Rocco DeRusio, for whom Odorisio Park is named, he was 6th Ward Commissioner, President of the Board of Commissioners, and also state representative. So and again, no, you can't do that anymore because of the charter, and that was one thing that came later on. That's a whole other situation, the township charter. Okay, so let's get started into later in the mid-60s. In the 65, Bernie White and Joe Kimmel, 2nd and 4th Ward, were elected commissioners. This was the beginning of the new look, okay? The new look had started really 64 into that, but it was somebody said, well, let's give it a new look, and somehow that caught. Different people claim the idea, but it got started. And so anyhow, in 1966, the insurgency rallied, and more New Look committee people were on out of the 28, and the count then after that election was 17 to 11, still with the old look, the regular Radnor Republicans. So in order to enhance their situation, the regular Radnor Republicans, Al Swing promoting it, proposed a redistricting plan. There are 7 wards, of course, 9 wards, and also later on, a few months later, 11 wards. The reason? Get more commissioners, okay, that they could control. So that was, and I got involved then. I'm an engineer, but somehow I got elected to do a redistricting plan for 7 wards, and we went back and forth, got into the lower court and all that, but anyhow, the 7 wards prevailed. But that was, again, part of the strategy, and these are headline makers in those days. So at that time, in the 66 area, now, Open Space Committee was formed, and others are going to talk about that, so I'm going to let them do that. But that was the committee, one of the committees proposing or pushing for a bond issue, as was the New Look Republican Committee. And we were aiming toward the May 1967 primary to put in a ballot question on to borrow money, okay? So in the early 1967, Al Swing and the regular Republicans started arguing against the proposed bond issue. And their arguments were excessive cost. They thought that it was going to cost at least another 2 or 3 mils. The Open Space Committee, I saw a number there someplace, they thought it would be maximum of 1.4 mils. But in any event, that was one basic argument. The 900,000 was, and I don't know exactly how it was selected, but it was proposed to buy 250 acres at $3,800 an acre. Now Radnor has 8,800 acres. About 200 were already involved or promoted or destined for the Blue Route. But there was a National Park Board had recommended 10 acres per 10,000 people. Well, if you take, Radnor's population was about 25,000 at the time, so that translates into 250 acres. Now, we already had some, but anyhow, that's some numbers that I could find to kind of justify it at that time. The regular Republicans, Al Swing and crew, also said that we had enough open space. We didn't need any more. And they totaled up all the school district property and said that was all open space, all usable for everybody. Well, as you know, it's not. It was restricted then for access. Obviously, people do use it, but not entirely open space, obviously. So that's where the 2 issues came down, and there was heavy campaigning. Well, good things resulted. The bond issue won 4-1, with both the New Look Republicans and the Democratic Party both promoting it, and it won very nicely, and everybody was very happy. So just about there, my end of my presentation. 1968, the next year, the New Look swept both in the primaries and both the committee and the commissioners. And in 1969, there was a fresh new look on the board, a young fellow by the name of Bill Spingler, who happened to be the first Democrat on the board. Major move, Great. Been wonderful ever since. I can say that as a good Republican. He's all right, I'll tell you. Anyhow, fast forward lastly to 1973. The commissioners voted to acquire the Zanzinger estate and the Moss Agnew property, which is Fenimore Woods. And it was kind of interesting that Ann Cabine had been nominated or put on the board by the existing commissioners. Rocco DiRicio had died. We had a special election in the summer for his wife to run. She ran for a year and then decided not to go anymore anyhow. Ann Cabine was the first woman to be on the board for any length of time. She wanted to also add the Levin tract to that purchase. And look how long it's taken to get that. So it takes a while to get there. Okay, that does me. On to Bob Hurd. Thank you.
I moved to Rosemont, Blackfriar Road in 1960. And because there's no civic association down in that Rosemont, Garrett Hill, or